Sarah Mitchell walked through the crowded airport terminal, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. She pulled her old baseball cap lower over her eyes, hoping to blend into the sea of travelers. Her faded jeans and oversized hoodie made her look like any college student heading home for the holidays. Nobody would guess that just 5 years ago she had been one of the most feared assassins in the world. The coffee shop line moved slowly as Sarah checked her phone for the third time. Her flight to Portland wouldn't board for another hour, giving her plenty of time to grab a drink and find a quiet corner to read. She had grown to love these simple moments, waiting in lines, reading books, living like a normal person. After years of violence and danger, boring had become beautiful. Next, called the barista, a young man with bright blue hair and multiple piercings, Sarah stepped forward and ordered a simple black coffee. As she waited, she noticed a man in a dark suit watching her from across the terminal. Their eyes met for a split second before he quickly looked away, pretending to study his newspaper. Sarah's muscles tensed instinctively. Old habits died hard and her training kicked in automatically. She scanned the area, noting exit points and potential weapons. 2 more men in suits sat near the departure gates, both occasionally glancing in her direction. "This wasn't a coincidence. Large black coffee," the barista announced. Sarah grabbed her cup and walked toward the restrooms, using the reflective surfaces of shop windows to monitor the men behind her. They were following but keeping their distance. Professional but not quite good enough to fool someone with her background. Inside the women's restroom, Sarah locked herself in a stall and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she had memorized but hoped never to use again. It rang twice before a familiar gravelly voice answered. "Marcus Chen speaking." "It's me," Sarah whispered. A long pause followed. "Ghost, I thought you were dead. That was the plan. But I think my past just caught up with me." Marcus had been her handler during her years as Night Viper, the code name that struck fear into criminal organizations worldwide. He was the only person who knew her real identity and location. If anyone could help her figure out who was hunting her, it was him. "Where are you?" Marcus asked. "Denver International. 3 men in suits, probably armed. They're not trying to hide their surveillance. Can you lose them?" Sarah peeked out of the stall. The restroom was empty, but she could hear footsteps in the corridor outside. "Maybe, but Marcus, I've been clean for 5 years. I teach kindergarten now. Why would anyone want me?" "I don't know, but listen carefully. There's been chatter in the intelligence community. Someone's been asking questions about Night Viper. Old enemies, old contracts. I thought it was just rumors, but if they found you..." The footsteps outside stopped. Sarah heard the soft squeak of rubber soles on tile. Someone was waiting right outside the door. Her heart rate increased, but her breathing remained steady. The training never really left. "I have to go," she whispered into the phone. "Sarah, get to Safe House 7. Remember the protocols. And Sarah, be careful. These people aren't amateurs." She hung up and slipped the phone into her pocket. Safe House 7 was in Chicago, a 12-hour drive from Denver. First, she needed to get out of this airport alive. Sarah flushed the toilet and walked to the sinks, washing her hands while studying the mirror. When she opened the restroom door, one of the suited men was standing directly in front of her, pretending to text on his phone. He was tall and muscular with a small scar above his left eyebrow. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely, stepping around him. The man grabbed her arm. "Ms. Mitchell, we need to talk." Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. She twisted her arm free while simultaneously driving her elbow into the man's solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for air, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it at an unnatural angle. The phone clattered to the floor. "I don't know who you are," Sarah said quietly, "but I suggest you walk away." Other travelers had stopped to stare at the commotion. Sarah released the man's wrist and backed away, her eyes scanning for his partners. She spotted them moving through the crowd, closing in from different directions. The scarred man straightened up, his face twisted with pain and anger. "You can't run forever, Night Viper. We know who you are. We know what you've done." Sarah's blood ran cold. Nobody had called her by that name in years. She turned and ran, pushing through the crowd toward the nearest exit. Behind her, she could hear shouting and the sound of running feet. The terminal erupted in chaos as airport security responded to reports of a disturbance. Sarah used the confusion to her advantage, weaving between panicked travelers and overturned luggage. She reached the parking garage and spotted a maintenance worker's golf cart with the keys still in the ignition. "Sorry," she muttered. jumping into the cart and speeding toward the exit. As she drove through the city streets, Sarah's mind raced. Someone had not only discovered her identity, but had also tracked her to a random airport. This wasn't just bad luck or a chance encounter. Someone with serious resources was hunting her. She ditched the golf cart in a shopping mall parking lot and used cash to buy new clothes from a thrift store. In the mall's bathroom, she cut her long brown hair short and dyed it black with supplies from a drugstore. The woman who emerged looked nothing like the kindergarten teacher who had entered. Sarah found an old truck for sale in the classified ads and paid cash for it. As she drove through the night toward Chicago, she tried to make sense of what was happening. Night Viper had been buried 5 years ago when she walked away from that life. She had completed her final mission, eliminating an arms dealer who was selling weapons to terrorists, and then simply vanished. The government had been happy to let her disappear. She knew too many secrets and had too much blood on her hands. A quiet retirement was better than a messy trial or an assassination attempt. But now someone wanted her back in the game. As the city lights of Denver faded in her rearview mirror, Sarah Mitchell, former Night Viper, realized that her peaceful life as a kindergarten teacher was over. The database that had lit up with her name had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. She was being hunted by people who knew her capabilities, and they wouldn't give up easily. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but Sarah was no longer the naive young woman who had first been recruited into the world of espionage and assassination. She had survived 5 years in the shadows, and now she would do whatever it took to survive what was coming next. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove through the night, already planning her next move. The hunter had become the hunted, but Night Viper wasn't going down without a fight. The safe house looked like an abandoned warehouse from the outside, but Sarah knew better. She parked the truck 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using alleyways and shadows to avoid detection. The Chicago streets were quiet at 3 in the morning, with only the occasional police car or late-night delivery truck breaking the silence. She found the hidden keypad behind a loose brick and entered the code Marcus had taught her years ago. The heavy metal door clicked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Sarah descended carefully, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The basement was larger than it appeared, filled with computers, weapons, and surveillance equipment. Emergency supplies lined the shelves, enough food and water for several weeks. Maps covered one wall, marked with safe routes out of the city. This was exactly what she needed. Sarah sat down at the main computer and began typing. The system required multiple passwords and biometric scans before granting access to the intelligence networks. Her fingerprints still registered in the system, despite her supposed death 5 years earlier. Some things never got erased completely. The search results made her stomach drop. Her photograph appeared on at least 6 different classified databases, along with her Night Viper profile and mission history. Someone had been very busy digging up information about her past. But who and why now? A secure message appeared on the screen. Marcus had been monitoring the system, waiting for her to make contact. Situation worse than expected, the message read. Contract issued 3 days ago. $5 million bounty. Multiple hunters activated. Unknown client. Payment verified through Swiss accounts. Get out of Chicago immediately. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. $5 million was enough to attract every professional killer and bounty hunter in the world. Someone really wanted her dead, and they had the resources to make it happen. She typed back quickly. Who issued the contract? Still investigating. But Sarah, there's something else. The client specifically requested you be brought in alive. This isn't just about elimination. Someone wants to talk to you first. That information changed everything. If they wanted her alive, it meant they needed something from her. Information, a confession, or maybe just the satisfaction of killing her personally. Either way, it gave her a small advantage. Sarah spent the next hour studying the intelligence reports. The 3 men from the airport were part of a larger operation. At least 12 professional hunters had been hired to track her down, each with their own specialty. Some were former military, others were ex-intelligence operatives. All of them were dangerous. The reports also revealed disturbing details about her past missions. Someone had compiled a complete record of Night Viper's activities, including classified operations that should have been buried forever. The arms dealer in Prague, the terrorist financier in Dubai, the corrupt politician in Moscow. Every kill was documented with photos and detailed reports. As she read through the files, Sarah noticed something strange. The information was too complete, too accurate. This wasn't something that could be pieced together from public records or intelligence leaks. Someone with direct access to government databases had compiled this information. The hunter wasn't just well-funded. They were connected to people in high places. A motion sensor alarm suddenly activated, displaying red dots on the building's security cameras. 3 vehicles had pulled up outside the warehouse and armed figures were moving into position. Sarah had been tracked to the safe house. She quickly downloaded the intelligence files onto an encrypted drive and gathered weapons from the safe house armory. 2 pistols, extra ammunition, and a tactical knife went into a backpack, along with emergency cash and fake identification documents. The safe house had served its purpose, but now it had become a trap. Sarah activated the building's automated defense systems as she headed for the emergency exit. Steel shutters slammed down over the windows while recorded alarms began blaring throughout the building. The confusion would buy her a few minutes, but these weren't amateurs she was dealing with. The emergency tunnel led to an adjacent building's basement. Sarah emerged in an old boiler room and climbed stairs to reach street level. Behind her, she could hear shouting and the sound of explosives as the hunters breached the safe house entrance. She moved quickly through the pre-dawn streets, using her knowledge of urban surveillance to avoid security cameras and police patrols. The hunters would expect her to flee the city immediately, but Sarah had learned years ago that sometimes the best hiding place was right under your enemy's nose. An all-night diner provided temporary shelter and a chance to think. Sarah ordered coffee and studied the city map while monitoring news reports on her phone. The safe house incident hadn't made the news yet, which meant the hunters were operating with official cooperation. Someone in the government was helping them. The pieces were starting to come together in Sarah's mind. Her final mission 5 years ago had been sanctioned by a joint task force involving multiple intelligence agencies. The arms dealer she had eliminated was selling weapons to terrorist groups, but he was also providing information to law enforcement. Her mission had disrupted several ongoing investigations. Someone connected to those investigations wanted revenge, or maybe they wanted to clean up loose ends. Sarah represented a liability. She knew too much about the operations and the people involved. The 5-year delay made sense now. It had taken time to plan this operation and gather the resources needed to hunt down a legendary assassin. A news alert on her phone confirmed her suspicions. The arms dealer's son, Viktor Kozlov, had recently been appointed to a high-level position in international law enforcement. He would have access to intelligence databases and the authority to authorize cross-border operations. More importantly, he would have a personal motive for wanting Night Viper dead. Sarah finished her coffee and left cash on the table. The game had changed again. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping someone who was using official resources for personal revenge. If Viktor Kozlov was behind the hunting contract, he wouldn't stop until she was dead or captured. She walked to a nearby electronics store and purchased a prepaid phone. Marcus needed to know what she had discovered, but she couldn't risk using the secure channels again. The hunters would be monitoring all official communication networks. The phone rang twice before Marcus answered with a cautious, "Hello? It's me. Don't use my name. I know who's behind this. Go ahead. The arms dealer from Prague. His son is now in law enforcement. High-level access, personal motivation, and the resources to fund this operation." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That makes sense. But if he's using official channels, we can't fight this through normal means. You're on your own, I know, but I need one favor. Can you get me a meeting with someone who knew the original operation? Someone who might have evidence about what really happened in Prague. There's someone in Washington who worked on the task force. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, now retired from the CIA. She lives quietly, but she might talk to you. I'll send you her address. Sarah felt a spark of hope. If Dr. Walsh had kept records from the Prague operation, she might have evidence that Viktor Kozlov's father wasn't the innocent businessman he had appeared to be. That evidence could expose the truth and end the hunting contract. Be careful, Marcus added. If Kozlov is using official resources, he probably has people watching everyone connected to that operation. The phone went dead, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Washington, D.C. was 8 hours away by car, and every mile would be dangerous. The hunters would expect her to run, but they might not expect her to go directly toward the source of her problems. Sarah walked back to her truck, already planning the route to the capital. The scared kindergarten teacher who had fled Denver was gone. Night Viper was coming back, and this time she was hunting the hunters. Viktor Kozlov had made a mistake by bringing her back into the game. Now he was going to learn why she had been the best assassin in the world. The morning sun was rising over Chicago as Sarah drove east toward Washington. Behind her, the hunters were still searching the safe house ruins. Ahead of her lay answers, confrontation, and possibly her final mission. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah Mitchell felt like she was back in control of her destiny. Dr. Jennifer Walsh lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Washington, D.C., in a house that looked like it belonged to any retired government worker. Sarah had spent 2 days watching the house from different positions, learning the patterns of the neighborhood and identifying potential threats. The hunters were closing in. She had spotted surveillance teams at 3 different locations during her drive from Chicago. On the 3rd morning, Sarah approached the house directly. Sometimes the bold approach was the safest one. She walked up the front path like a friend coming for coffee, rang the doorbell, and waited. The woman who answered the door was in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that immediately assessed Sarah from head to toe. Dr. Walsh had clearly maintained her intelligence training even in retirement. "Can I help you?" Dr. Walsh asked, but her hand remained on the door handle, ready to close it quickly if necessary. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I think you knew me by a different name 5 years ago." Dr. Walsh's eyes widened slightly. "You're supposed to be dead. That was the plan. But someone decided to dig up the past. I need to talk to you about Viktor Kozlov and what really happened in Prague." Dr. Walsh looked past Sarah to scan the street, then stepped aside. "Come in quickly. We don't have much time." The inside of the house was neat and organized, but Sarah noticed the small details that revealed Dr. Walsh's true nature. Security cameras disguised as decorative objects, reinforced door frames, and a panic button hidden near the telephone. This woman had made enemies during her career and was prepared for trouble. "I've been expecting someone to come asking questions," Dr. Walsh said, leading Sarah into the living room. "When Viktor Kozlov got his new position 6 months ago, I knew it was only a matter of time before he started looking for revenge. What can you tell me about the Prague operation?" Dr. Walsh poured coffee from a pot that had been waiting on the side table. Officially, Dmitry Kozlov was an arms dealer who needed to be eliminated because he was selling weapons to terrorist groups. That part was true, but there was much more to the story. She walked to a bookshelf and removed what looked like an old photo album. Inside were copies of classified documents, photographs, and recorded conversations. Sarah realized that Dr. Walsh had been preparing for this conversation for years. Dmitry Kozlov was also providing information to multiple intelligence agencies, Dr. Walsh continued. He was a double agent, selling weapons to terrorists and then giving us their locations and plans. The information he provided saved thousands of lives. Sarah studied the documents. Then why was I ordered to kill him? Because someone wanted him silenced permanently. The task force was told that Kozlov was about to disappear and take his terrorist contacts with him. We were told it was our last chance to eliminate a major threat. The coffee grew cold as Sarah read through the files. The evidence was damning. Someone in the intelligence community had deliberately misrepresented Dmitry Kozlov's status, turning a valuable informant into a target for assassination. "Who gave the final order?" Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh showed her a classified memo with an official seal. Assistant Director Robert Hayes from the FBI. He convinced the task force that Kozlov had to be eliminated immediately. No time for further investigation or attempts to bring him in alive. Sarah recognized the name. Robert Hayes had been her contact for several missions during her time as Night Viper. He had always been aggressive, pushing for quick solutions over careful investigation. But she had never suspected he might be working against agency interests. Where is Hayes now? Dead. Car accident 3 years ago. Very convenient timing considering Viktor Kozlov was starting to ask questions about his father's death. The pieces were falling into place. Hayes had ordered Dmitry Kozlov's assassination for unknown reasons, then died before he could be questioned about it. Viktor Kozlov had spent years investigating his father's death and had finally gathered enough evidence to track down the assassin who had killed him. There's something else, Dr. Walsh said, showing Sarah a photograph. This was taken 2 days before your Prague mission. Dmitry Kozlov meeting with Robert Hayes at a restaurant in Virginia. Sarah stared at the photograph. Hayes and Kozlov appeared to be having an intense conversation. They looked like business partners, not enemies. I think Hayes was working with Kozlov on something unauthorized, Dr. Walsh explained. Maybe they were partners in arms dealing, or maybe Hayes was being blackmailed. Either way, Hayes used the intelligence community to solve his personal problem. A car door slammed outside, followed by another. Sarah moved to the window and saw 3 black SUVs parked on the street. Armed figures were moving into position around the house. We have company, Sarah said. Dr. Walsh calmly walked to the fireplace and pressed a hidden switch. Steel shutters dropped over all the windows while emergency lights activated throughout the house. I've been ready for this day for 5 years. Sarah grabbed the documents from the coffee table. Is there a way out? Basement tunnel leads to the storm drain system. But first, take this. Dr. Walsh handed her a small device that looked like a USB drive. Everything you need is on there. Bank records, communication logs, witness statements. Enough evidence to prove that Robert Hayes manipulated the Prague operation for personal reasons. The sound of breaking glass came from upstairs as the hunters began their assault on the house. Sarah could hear boots on the hardwood floors and voices coordinating the search. What about you? Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh smiled grimly and showed her a pistol that had been hidden in the coffee table drawer. I'm 72 years old and tired of running. Besides, someone needs to slow them down so you can escape. Sarah wanted to argue, but gunfire erupted from upstairs. Dr. Walsh was right, someone needed to buy time for the evidence to reach safety. Make sure the truth comes out, Dr. Walsh said. Dmitry Kozlov was a good man who died because of one corrupt agent. His son deserves to know that. Sarah nodded and headed for the basement stairs. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Walsh moving through the house, preparing for a final stand against overwhelming odds. The basement tunnel was narrow and dark, filled with the sound of rushing water from the storm drains. Sarah crawled through the concrete passage, clutching the USB drive that contained the evidence needed to clear her name and expose the truth about Prague. She emerged from a drainage outlet 3 blocks away, covered in mud, but alive. The suburban neighborhood looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, but Sarah could see smoke rising from the direction of Dr. Walsh's house. The old spy had kept her promise to buy time. Sarah found an internet cafe and uploaded the evidence files to multiple secure servers. She sent copies to journalists, government oversight committees, and intelligence review boards. Within hours, the story would be public knowledge. As she walked back to her truck, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We have what we came for. The hunt is over. VK Viktor Kozlov thought he had won by eliminating Dr. Walsh, but he didn't know about the evidence that was now spreading across the internet. The truth about Robert Hayes and the Prague operation would soon be public knowledge. Sarah drove north toward the Canadian border, monitoring news reports on her phone. The story broke on the evening news. Classified documents reveal FBI corruption in international operations. The evidence Dr. Walsh had preserved was creating a scandal that reached the highest levels of government. By midnight, Sarah was crossing into Canada with a passport that identified her as a tourist from Oregon. Viktor Kozlov's hunting contract had been officially canceled, and arrest warrants had been issued for his role in the unauthorized operation against Sarah. The woman who had looked like a nobody to airport security 3 days earlier was now front-page news around the world. Night Viper had been reactivated one final time, not to kill, but to expose the truth about corruption and revenge in the intelligence community. As she drove through the Canadian countryside, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in 5 years, she was truly free. The past had been settled, the truth had been revealed, and the hunters had become the hunted. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had given her life to ensure that justice would prevail. Sarah would make sure that sacrifice was remembered and honored. The kindergarten teacher from Portland was gone forever, but the woman driving north toward a new life carried the strength and determination of Night Viper with her always. 3 weeks later, Sarah was living under a new identity in a small fishing village on the coast of Nova Scotia. The media storm surrounding the Prague operation had died down, and Viktor Kozlov was awaiting trial in a maximum security prison. The official story was that the Night Viper case had been closed permanently, with all parties either dead or in custody. But Sarah knew the intelligence world better than most people. Cases like this were never really closed, and there were always loose ends that someone wanted tied up. She wasn't surprised when Marcus Chen appeared at her door on a rainy Thursday morning. "You look good," Marcus said, studying her new appearance. Sarah had gained weight, dyed her hair blonde, and wore glasses that changed the shape of her face. "Very convincing tourist look." "I'm retired, Marcus. Permanently this time." Marcus stepped into the small cabin and looked around at the simple furniture and fishing equipment. "I know, but there's a problem. Viktor Kozlov didn't work alone in hunting you down. He had a partner, someone with even better connections and more resources." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Who?" "Elena Vasquez, former CIA operative and current head of a private intelligence company. She's the one who actually organized the hunting operation. Kozlov provided the motivation and funding, but Vasquez handled the logistics." Marcus showed her a photograph of a woman in her 40s with dark hair and cold eyes. Sarah recognized the face immediately. Elena had been a rising star in the agency during Sarah's final years as Night Viper. Ruthlessly ambitious and completely without conscience. Why would she partner with Kozlov? Money and power. Kozlov promised her $50 million and exclusive contracts with his father's old network. Elena saw an opportunity to build her company into a major player in private intelligence. Sarah sat down heavily in her favorite chair by the window. Let me guess, she's not happy that her investment didn't pay off. Worse than that. With Kozlov in prison and the Prague story public, Elena's lost everything. Her company is under investigation, her clients have disappeared, and her reputation is destroyed. She blames you for ruining her life. Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah surveillance footage from various locations. Elena's people had been asking questions in Montreal, Quebec City, and Halifax. They were working their way toward the maritime provinces, following the same route Sarah had taken into Canada. "How long do I have?" Sarah asked. "Maybe a week before they narrow down your location." Elena's not as well funded as Kozlov was, but she's more dangerous because she's desperate. She's also better trained than the hunters you faced before. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the fishing boats in the harbor. The peaceful life she had built here was about to be shattered again. The lobster fishermen who had befriended her would be in danger if Elena's people found this place. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Elena has convinced certain people in Washington that you're a security risk. She's claiming that you have classified information that could damage ongoing operations if it falls into the wrong hands." "That's ridiculous. I've been out of the game for 5 years. It doesn't matter if it's true. Elena has official backing for her operation now. She's been authorized to bring you in for debriefing by any means necessary." Sarah understood the implications. Elena could operate with impunity, using government resources and authority to pursue her personal vendetta. Anyone who tried to help Sarah would be labeled as interfering with national security. "What do you recommend?" Marcus closed the tablet and looked directly at her. "Disappear again. I can get you new documents and transport to South America or Southeast Asia, somewhere Elena can't reach you." Sarah considered the option, but something didn't feel right. Running had worked before, but it had also allowed corrupt people like Robert Hayes and Viktor Kozlov to operate without consequences. If she disappeared now, Elena would just find another target to blame for her problems. "No, I'm tired of running from people who abuse the system for personal gain. Elena Vasquez needs to be stopped before she destroys more lives. Sarah, you can't take on the entire intelligence establishment. Elena has resources you can't match. Maybe. But she also has weaknesses. She's desperate, which means she'll make mistakes. And she's operating based on personal revenge rather than professional judgment. That gives me an advantage," Marcus shook his head. "This isn't like the other situations. Elena knows all your old tactics and methods. She helped design some of the training programs you went through. You can't surprise her with techniques she taught you." Sarah smiled for the first time since Marcus had arrived. "Then I'll have to use techniques she didn't teach me. Elena trained the old Night Viper, but she's never faced the person I've become." Over the next 2 days, Sarah prepared for what she knew would be her final confrontation with the past. She contacted the fishermen in the village and warned them about potential danger, giving them enough information to stay safe without revealing too much about her identity. She also reached out to journalists and government oversight officials who had covered the Prague operation story. If Elena was using official authority for personal revenge, those same officials would be interested in another case of intelligence community corruption. The trap Sarah set was elegant in its simplicity. She allowed Elena's people to track her to a fishing cabin 20 miles up the coast, then made sure they saw her entering the building at dusk. The cabin was isolated, with only one road leading to it through dense forest. Elena arrived at midnight with a team of 6 operatives. They surrounded the cabin and moved in with military precision, expecting to find Sarah sleeping or hiding inside. Instead, they found explosives and a recorded message. "Hello, Elena. By now you've realized that this is a trap. The explosives won't kill you, but they've destroyed any evidence that I was ever here. If you want to find me, check the old fishing pier at dawn. Come alone. Or I'll disappear forever and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Elena's team regrouped at their vehicles, angry and frustrated. Their target had outmaneuvered them completely, using their own tracking efforts to lure them into an embarrassing trap. "She's toying with us," one of the operatives said. Elena stared at the burning cabin. "No, she's challenging me to single combat. She thinks she can take me in a fair fight. It's obviously another trap. Maybe, but Sarah Mitchell has always been arrogant about her abilities. She doesn't think I can match her in direct confrontation." Elena checked her weapons and communication equipment, set up overwatch positions around the pier. If this goes badly, eliminate her immediately. As dawn approached, Sarah was already in position at the fishing pier. She had arrived hours earlier and prepared the area carefully, removing potential weapons and blocking escape routes. This confrontation would be decided by skill and determination, not by superior firepower or backup support. Elena appeared at the end of the pier as the sun rose over the ocean. She was dressed in tactical gear and moved with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a direct confrontation. "You look older," Elena called out as she approached. "You look desperate," Sarah replied. They stopped 10 feet apart, close enough to talk without shouting but far enough apart to react if the other made a sudden move. "This could have been simple," Elena said. "If you had just stayed hidden, I would have eventually given up and found other opportunities. But you had to be the hero, exposing corruption and seeking justice. Now my life is ruined. Your life is ruined because you chose to work with a criminal for personal gain. I just made sure the truth came out." Elena laughed bitterly. "The truth? The truth is that people like us don't get happy endings. We do terrible things for good reasons and eventually the past catches up with us. You've just been luckier than most." "Maybe, but I learned something important during my time as a kindergarten teacher. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies even when it's dangerous, or even when you're scared." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching helicopters. Elena looked up in confusion as government aircraft circled the pier. "I told you to come alone," Sarah said. "I did. Those aren't my people." Sarah smiled and pulled out her phone, showing Elena a recording app that had been running throughout their conversation. "But they are mine. Well, not mine exactly, but journalists and federal investigators were very interested in hearing you confess to using government resources for personal revenge." Elena's face went pale as she realized she had been completely outmaneuvered. The recording of her confession would end any official support for her operations and probably result in criminal charges. As federal agents rappelled down from the helicopters, Sarah walked past Elena toward the shore. "You're right about one thing. People like us don't usually get happy endings, but sometimes we get the chance to make sure justice is served." Elena Vasquez was arrested on charges of abuse of authority, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. Her private intelligence company was shut down permanently, and several government officials who had supported her operation were forced to resign. Sarah Mitchell walked away from the pier a free woman, her past finally buried for good. The database that had lit up with Night Viper's name would never be activated again. She had faced her demons and won not through violence, but through courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. 6 months after Elena Vasquez's arrest, Sarah was living quietly in Vancouver under her real name for the first time in 5 years. The Canadian government had granted her refugee status after reviewing the evidence of government persecution, and she had found work as a security consultant for a small technology company. Life was peaceful, normal, and exactly what she had hoped for. That changed on a cold February morning when she found Marcus Chen waiting outside her apartment building. But this time he wasn't alone. A young woman with dark hair and nervous eyes stood beside him. constantly checking over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "We need to talk," Marcus said without his usual greeting. "Somewhere private." Sarah led them to a coffee shop she knew had a back room used for private meetings. The owner was a former intelligence analyst who understood the need for discretion. Once they were seated with coffee and the door was closed, Marcus introduced his companion. "This is Anna Kozlov, Victor's younger sister. She's been in hiding since her brother's arrest, but something's happened that affects all of us." Anna spoke with a slight Russian accent, her voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. "3 days ago, my brother was murdered in prison. The official report says it was a suicide, but I know Victor would never kill himself. He was planning to appeal his conviction." Sarah studied Anna's face, looking for signs of deception. The family resemblance to Victor was strong, but where he had been cold and calculating, Anna seemed genuinely frightened and confused. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sarah said carefully, "but I don't see how this involves me. Your brother tried to have me killed. Why would you come to me for help?" Anna pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table. "Because before he died, Victor discovered something about our father's death that changes everything. He sent this to me through his lawyer, with instructions to give it to you if anything happened to him." The envelope contained photographs, bank records, and copies of encrypted communications. Sarah recognized some of the faces in the photographs: Robert Hayes, Elena Vasquez, and several other intelligence operatives. But there were also new faces, people she didn't recognize from her time in the field. "What am I looking at?" Sarah asked. "Proof that our father's assassination was part of a larger conspiracy. Robert Hayes didn't act alone when he ordered the Prague operation. He was working for a group of intelligence officials who were using their positions to eliminate anyone who threatened their business interests." Marcus leaned forward to examine the documents. "Business interests?" Anna nodded. "My father wasn't just an arms dealer and intelligence asset. He was also investigating corruption within the international intelligence community. He had discovered that certain officials were selling classified information to the highest bidder, using their access to sensitive data for personal profit." The implications hit Sarah immediately. "Your father was killed because he was going to expose this conspiracy." "Yes. And Robert Hayes used the intelligence community's resources to eliminate him, making it look like a legitimate counter-terrorism operation. Victor spent years investigating this, and he finally found proof." Sarah studied the bank records more carefully. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars flowing through offshore accounts, payments to shell companies, transactions that clearly indicated large-scale corruption. Why didn't Victor release this information publicly? Anna's face darkened. "Because some of the people involved are still active in intelligence agencies around the world. They have the power to make problems disappear, along with the people who create those problems. Victor was planning to negotiate immunity in exchange for the evidence. But someone found out about his plan and had him killed before he could make the deal," Marcus concluded. "The conspiracy is bigger than any of us realized," Anna continued. "Elena Vasquez was just a small part of it. The real leaders are still out there, and they're willing to kill anyone who threatens their operation." Sarah felt a familiar chill as she processed the information. This wasn't over. It might never be over. The corruption that had destroyed her peaceful life ran deeper than she had imagined, and now she was one of the few people who knew the truth. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked. "Help me get this information to people who can act on it safely. I don't have the contacts or the expertise to do this alone. But you know how the intelligence world works. You know who can be trusted." Marcus shook his head. "Sarah, this is bigger than anything we've dealt with before. If this conspiracy involves active intelligence officials from multiple countries, they'll have resources we can't match. Maybe. But they also have a weakness. They think Victor took his secrets to the grave. They don't know about this evidence, and they don't know that Anna escaped their surveillance." Sarah made her decision. The peaceful life in Vancouver had been an illusion anyway. As long as this conspiracy existed, she would never be truly safe. Better to face the threat directly than to spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. "I'll help you," she told Anna. "But we do this my way. No unnecessary risks, no heroic gestures. We gather more evidence, identify the key players, and then we expose them all at once so they can't retaliate." Anna nodded eagerly. "I have contacts who worked with my father. People who suspected something was wrong but were afraid to speak out. With Victor gone, they might be willing to help." Over the next week, Sarah coordinated a careful investigation into the conspiracy. Using Anna's contacts and Marcus's intelligence connections, they began building a comprehensive picture of the corruption network. The scope was breathtaking. Intelligence officials from at least 6 countries were involved, selling everything from classified military technology to the identities of undercover operatives. They had been operating for over a decade, using legitimate intelligence operations as cover for their criminal activities. Robert Hayes had been recruited into the conspiracy during his early career, when he was drowning in gambling debts. Elena Vasquez had joined later, seeing an opportunity to build her private intelligence company using stolen government resources. Dmitry Kozlov had discovered their activities by accident and tried to use the information to protect himself and his family. The Prague operation wasn't just about silencing your father, Sarah explained to Anna. It was about sending a message to anyone else who might be tempted to investigate or expose the conspiracy. Anna studied the evidence they had gathered, so my brother's quest for revenge actually helped uncover a much larger crime. Yes, Victor was right to seek justice for your father's death. He just didn't realize how many powerful people were involved in covering up the truth. As they prepared to release the evidence publicly, Sarah received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was electronically disguised, but the message was clear. Ms. Mitchell, we know what you're planning. Walk away now, and you can keep your peaceful life in Vancouver. Continue this investigation and you'll share Victor Kozlov's fate. Sarah handed the phone to Marcus, who immediately began tracing the call, but she already knew it would lead nowhere. These people were professionals with access to the most advanced surveillance technology. They're scared, Anna observed. If they weren't worried about our evidence, they wouldn't have bothered to threaten us. Sarah nodded, but she also understood the reality of their situation. The conspiracy had killed Victor Kozlov in a maximum security prison, making it look like suicide. They could certainly arrange accidents for 3 people in Vancouver. We need to move fast, Sarah said. Once this information goes public, we'll be safer. But until then, we're all targets. That night, Sarah sent encrypted copies of all their evidence to journalists, government oversight committees, and international law enforcement agencies. She also arranged for the information to be released automatically if anything happened to her, Anna, or Marcus. The conspiracy that had started with one arms dealer's investigation into intelligence corruption was about to be exposed to the world. Sarah knew that the people behind it would fight back with everything they had, but she also knew that the truth was stronger than any conspiracy. As she prepared for what might be her final battle against the forces that had controlled her life for so long, Sarah felt a sense of completion. Night Viper had been created to serve her country's interests, but now she was serving something more important: justice for all the victims of corruption and abuse of power. The database, that had lit up with her name months earlier, had set in motion events that would reshape the intelligence community. Sarah Mitchell had looked like a nobody when this all began, but she was about to prove that sometimes nobodies could change the world. The story broke simultaneously on 3 continents at exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time. Major newspapers in London, New York, and Tokyo published identical headlines: International Intelligence Conspiracy Exposed. Within hours, the evidence that Sarah, Anna, and Marcus had gathered was being analyzed by investigators around the world. Sarah watched the news coverage from a safe house in the mountains outside Vancouver. Anna sat beside her, clutching a cup of tea while scrolling through social media reactions. Marcus paced by the window, monitoring secure communication channels for government responses. The German intelligence service has opened an investigation, Marcus reported. 3 officials have been suspended pending review. The British are calling for a parliamentary inquiry. On television, government officials were scrambling to respond to the revelations. Some denied knowledge of the conspiracy, others promised full investigations, and a few simply refused to comment. But the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss or cover up. Sarah's phone rang with a call from the same electronically disguised voice that had threatened her days earlier. This time the tone was different, desperate rather than threatening. "You've destroyed everything," the voice said. "Decades of carefully built relationships, legitimate operations that kept the world safe. Do you understand what you've done?" "I've exposed criminals who were hiding behind legitimate operations," Sarah replied. If that destroys anything, it needed to be destroyed. You think you've won, but this is just the beginning. There are people in this conspiracy who will never see the inside of a courtroom. They have too much power, too many connections. They'll disappear and rebuild somewhere else. Sarah looked at Anna, who was listening to the conversation through the phone's speaker. Maybe. But at least the world will know the truth about what happened to Dmitry Kozlov and all the other victims. The line went dead, leaving them in silence. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on the mountain slopes, covering the landscape in pristine white. Sarah felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with the scenery. Over the following weeks, the international intelligence scandal dominated news coverage around the world. Congressional hearings were announced in Washington, parliamentary inquiries began in London, and criminal investigations opened in a dozen countries. Some of the conspiracy members were arrested immediately. Lower-level operatives like Elena Vasquez had nowhere to hide once their crimes were exposed. Others, particularly those in senior positions, managed to resign quietly or disappear entirely before warrants could be issued. Anna received a call from the prosecutor handling Elena Vasquez's case. New charges were being filed based on the conspiracy evidence, and Anna would be a key witness in the trial. "Are you ready for that?" Sarah asked. Anna nodded firmly. "My father and brother died because they tried to expose the truth. The least I can do is testify about what they discovered." Marcus received offers from 3 different intelligence agencies to join their internal investigation teams. The scandal had created a demand for investigators who couldn't be compromised by existing relationships or loyalties. "What about you?" he asked Sarah. "Several agencies have expressed interest in bringing you back as a consultant. Your knowledge of black operations could be valuable in cleaning up this mess." Sarah considered the offer, but she already knew her answer. "I've done my part. Someone else can handle the cleanup." 3 months after the story broke, Sarah was back in her Vancouver apartment, reading about the latest developments in the ongoing investigations. Anna had returned to university to finish her law degree, determined to become a prosecutor. Marcus had accepted a position with an international oversight committee, tasked with preventing future intelligence community corruption. The world had changed because of their actions. New oversight procedures were being implemented, international cooperation agreements were being rewritten, and a generation of intelligence officials was being forced into early retirement. But Sarah knew that corruption was like a virus. It would find new ways to spread, new systems to infect. There would always be people willing to abuse power for personal gain, and there would always be a need for others to stand up and expose them. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw a young man in his 20s holding a manila envelope. He looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder in a way that reminded her of Anna during their first meeting. Sarah opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Ms. Mitchell?" "My name is David Patterson. I'm a data analyst with the NSA. I think I've discovered something you need to see." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of resignation and determination. The peaceful life in Vancouver was about to be interrupted again, but she was no longer surprised by that. Some people were destined to fight corruption wherever they found it. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Tell me what you found." David opened the envelope and spread documents across her coffee table. "I've been analyzing the financial records from the conspiracy you exposed. The money trail doesn't end with the people who have been arrested. There's another network, even bigger than the first one." Sarah studied the documents, recognizing the pattern of shell companies and offshore accounts that she had seen before. "How big?" "International. Government officials, private contractors, criminal organizations. They've been operating for at least 20 years, using intelligence resources to facilitate everything from arms dealing to human trafficking." Sarah sat down heavily in her chair, understanding the implications. The conspiracy they had exposed had been just one branch of a much larger criminal enterprise. Elena Vasquez and Viktor Kozlov had been small players in a game that spanned continents and involved billions of dollars. "Why bring this to me?" Sarah asked. "You could take this to your supervisors, or to the oversight committees that were created after our revelations." David shook his head. "I tried that. 3 different officials I approached have either been transferred to other departments or have had their security clearances suspended. Someone is protecting this network, someone with enough power to silence internal investigators." Sarah looked out her apartment window at the peaceful Vancouver street below. Children were playing in a nearby park, their laughter carrying on the afternoon breeze. She had fought so hard to protect that innocence, that normalcy. What makes you think I can help? Because you've already proven that the system can be beaten. You exposed one conspiracy despite overwhelming odds. Maybe you can help expose this one too. Sarah thought about Anna Kozlov, now studying law and planning to spend her career fighting for justice. She thought about Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had given her life to ensure that the truth about Prague would be revealed. She thought about all the victims of corruption who would never have the chance to tell their stories. "All right," Sarah said finally. "Show me everything you've found. But this time we're going to be even more careful. If this network is as big as you say, they'll have resources we can't imagine." David smiled for the first time since entering her apartment. "Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that." As they began reviewing the evidence, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The database that had lit up with Knight, Viper's name almost a year ago, had started a chain of events that was still unfolding. She had looked like a nobody when this all began, just another face in an airport crowd. But Sarah Mitchell had learned something important during her years as a kindergarten teacher and her months as a fugitive. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who looked like nobodies. The world needed people who were willing to stand up to corruption, regardless of the personal cost. Sarah had found her calling not as an assassin or a spy, but as someone who fought for truth and justice in a world that often valued neither. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Vancouver, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new opportunities to make a difference. Sarah Mitchell was ready for all of them. Night Viper might have been retired permanently, but the woman who had worn that code name was just getting started in her real mission, protecting the innocent and exposing those who would abuse their power. The database had lit up one final time, not with the name of an assassin, but with the identity of someone much more dangerous to corrupt officials everywhere. A person who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition might be.